So perhaps you've just opened your journal and there's the puddle reflection drawing page. Perhaps you've gone out and done a drawing and you're thinking, well, okay, yeah, well, how can I develop this more? What can I do? Now, firstly, what's to remember is puddles obviously formed outside when it rains. If, however, especially in current situations, you're unable to get outside, not a problem. I have here a cake tin filled with water. And this is basically like a puddle. It can emulate your puddle. So you can start creating reflections around it. You could perhaps place it in near a window so you get the reflection of the outside. What I've done is I've brought in some really cool objects, like space rocket, and some crazy wonderful plants, and I'm just positioning them. It'll be tricky to see on camera, but the angle of which I have at my desk, I can see some really cool reflections. And you've got to have a light source for this. I'm sitting in front of our windows because actually it's the light reflecting off the water, off the surface, that allows you to see the different objects. And actually these ones are creating some really beautiful shapes in there. I'm just going to bring in a bottle. I don't want that bottle. So you can really start having a play. So if you can't get out and about, it's not a problem. You can create your own puddle inside. It is best to try and use something that's a dark surface and a non-reflective. So you don't want something stainless steel to put your water in, because actually that will start to reflect. And if you don't even want to use water, just grab a little mirror and that will do the same job. What's nice about the water though, which you can't do with a mirror, is if I just wobble this, we get some really beautiful changes in the reflections as the water surface changes itself. And so that's why the puddle and the water offer some really interesting drawing potentials. Just going to remove this out of the way now, because I'm just going to go through two options on how to expand your puddle drawing repertoire. Very carefully move this water. Okay, the first one we're going to look at is using Collage. Now I've just drawn an outline of a puddle here. Literally just pencil outline of my puddle. I have here some collage papers just I had lying around. It's got some nice forms and textures on them. This is sort of tissue paper. These are all old prints because I am an artist. I have these old things hanging around which I use for collage. And of course you can use anything you like for collage. Images from newspapers. If your puddle was reflecting trees, are there images in the newspaper of trees which you can start cutting up? Images of houses, buildings, if your puddle was reflecting buildings. You know, packing paper, wrapping paper. Anything and everything that can be stuck down can be used for collage. You also need a pair of scissors and some stick glue or similar sticking glue. Rice paste glue, PVA, wet glues might make your paper buckle, so just be aware. Now this puddle I'm going to imagine was a tree in a forest, a tree reflecting puddle. So I'm just going to start, and this is quite freeform. I'm not going to be able to complete all my puddle on camera, but I'll give you the idea of what you can do and the fun you can have. Now what I'm also going to imagine this puddle happening is that it was a windy day. So there's my first tree. I'm just cutting where the outline of the puddle is. There we go. I'm just going to position this one. So as I say, I'm going to imagine mine was on a windy day. So the puddle wasn't still. It was actually quite ripply. So it created some really nice ripples. So instead of sticking my tree straight down, I'm going to cut them into as if a gust of wind has just blown from this side across to that side. So I'm cutting them into strips, because if you've observed from the puddle drawing, as the ripples are created, it affects how the drawing is seen and viewed, and it distorts the image. And the collage is really useful in allowing you to just observe and look at that and have fun with cutting up the different elements. So these are the lines of where my ripple was in the puddle. I'm now just going to trim off that bottom one to fit the puddle shape. Approximately. Obviously you will be able to spend a lot more time on this. Brilliant. And then this one the same. So you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. There we go. And as I say, be imaginative with your collage papers and start to layer and almost abstract the puddle. That means don't necessarily draw exactly as you've seen it. Utilise the fact and love having fun with the fact you're using collage, and you can kind of make some really cool shapes within your puddle. Okay. I'm also going to do, I've got this collage paper here. I like this top bit here, the actual, some tree foliage. So I'm going to actually, instead of cutting that, I'm going to tear that to give a sort of a softer edge. There we go. And I'm going to have that down here. I think I'm going to have that down here. Yeah, I am. I'm just going to trim it to approximately the shape of my puddle. And I'm going to add a ripple in it. And the ripple goes across there. There we go. So I've covered up part of my tree, but that doesn't matter. And then it gets broken up again across like that. Yeah, okay. Let's give that a quick stick, a little stick. And the last thing I'm going to sort of just give you sort of some ideas on with the collage. And you can, obviously you can integrate collage with drawing. You don't, you know, this is allowing you to use shapes you might have found, sorry, pictures you might have found from newspapers, anything like that, that reflect what you saw in the puddle. The last thing I'm going to bring on is this big piece, because I like this bright yellow here, but I also like, there's a bit down here, I'll just bring it into the camera. This bit here, which is actually a foot, but to me it reminds me of a tree just going into buds. So as the leaves are just opening, it's got this amazing lime green, so that's why I like that. So we're going to have that, and I'm going to bring it in there. Look at that. But I've got ripples going on, so I'm going to again split up my collage, sorry. And the other thing about the puddle drawings, what you can do is obviously you can draw around what was happening outside of the puddle. Was it, I mean, this is my imaginative woodland puddle, was your puddle, was it in a woodland? So what was on the forest floor? Were there bugs? Were there leaves? So give your puddle some context, we call it. So it's not just a floating abstract shape. Give it some context. So you can begin to see how you can really start building up your puddle reflection drawing. I'm just going to stick that corner down there, that's annoying me. There we go. And especially if we started to add context around the background, some brown leaves, forest floor going on, the puddle would really begin to stand out. And the in-between bits, did they have more trees in this case? Or are they just dark? Were they light, reflecting a bright sky? And then just start building up your puddle with the collage. The other idea I'm going to bring in now is another puddle outline, is a bit of stamping and printmaking. Now to do this, here's my puddle outline, you need to create what's called a mask. So with another piece of paper and a pencil, which I shall get now, you might not be able to see on camera, but I can see through to my puddle underneath. And so I am drawing my puddle shape, and then I'm going to cut that shape out. If you need help with this, obviously ask an adult. It can be tricky cutting a hole in the paper with a pair of scissors, so make sure you're safe. There we go. And you can see that is now overlapping my puddle drawing. That needs to stay on, so if you want to keep it in place, what you can always do is get a little piece of tape and just tape it down to your work surface until you're finished, because this is going to get quite inky or painty, whatever you're using. And so make sure you are appropriately covered, so you don't get yourself covered in paint or ink. Now again, I'm going with, this is a woodland puddle. So I have brought along some things that were reflected in my puddle. Some bracken, a coniferous tree. And I'm just going to show you, to begin with, these two, and then you'll be able to understand the principle and take it away. Now we want to make a print from this, and to do that what you might need is some paint, could be poster paint, acrylic paint, oil paint, and a sponge. And the sponge you can dip into the ink, dip into your paint, and pat onto the surface of your leaf, whatever it might be, and stamp down. Because I'm a printmaker and it's really cool, I get to use a roller. But I appreciate this is not the normal course of action. So please do use just like a household sponge, and just pat on paint to the surface. So I'm just rolling ink over the top. And when you do stamping with plants and things, feel the side, because sometimes the back side or the underside of the plant is bumpier than the top side, and therefore will create a better stamp. Smooth surfaces without any texture or any bumps won't create an interesting stamp. So look out for things with bumps. So there we go. And if you've taken one impression, it's called, so one print, one stamp, without putting more ink or paint back onto the surface, take another one, push another one down. And this is what we call in printmaking a ghost. It's a ghost print because it's going to be slightly paler. But there you go. What it allows you to do is to build up layers. So I'm going to do one more ghost print without re-inking up here. This puddle is becoming one that is, I think, underneath a massive pile of bracken. And we're reflecting all the bracken in the puddle. But you can see now why we added this mask, because if I lift this up, you can see the stamps are only in the puddle, not on the outside. And again, this will give you the option, if you wish, to contextualise your puddle. That means to draw the background around the puddle, so that you have this puddle and these images floating in the puddle, reflecting. This puddle's on a still day because I haven't broken it up. And what you can do again is using your drawing techniques, which you were doing in your journal. Perhaps you want to add some details in the puddle, some shading. And I'm going to do it a little bit here just to show you. So you can really begin to see the idea of how the puddle will build. just going to pause the stamping there. And this is where it gets really, really messy. So make sure you're using aprons and everything. I'm going to use my fingerprint. And my fingerprint is great because it naturally is very delicate. And it creates a lovely fingerprint texture, almost like the ripples of water. But it's allowing me to define the edge of the puddle, to add some sort of shading. So the puddle's not just a floating space. And have a look at your puddle. Are there darker areas which are hidden under the bush, like this bracken? Are they darker? Are there lighter areas which you need to just leave be and not add any tonal value? And fingerprints are always such good fun. And when you're doing your fingerprints, if you're doing it with paint as opposed to ink, printmaking ink, which will be the most likely situation, use a really, really thin bit of paint. You don't want to paint on great slathers of paint because you'll end up with blobs rather than lovely fingerprints. If you have any rubber stamps and you have a little stamp pad, you can put your fingers in that, press down the stamp pad and then press onto your paper. So you want the thinnest layer of paint or ink. Have a test on a sort of scrap piece of paper before you put it on your actual puddle. And don't necessarily, if you want delicate areas, you push very lightly. You don't push down hard. If you want really dark areas, push down harder. And the good thing about this mask is because I've taped it, I can lift up. And actually I'm going to take that off just so we can... There we go. So we can see how it worked. So there's our puddle with sort of the bracken and the conifer and the printmaking, which is really, really cool. And again, this is where you can begin to add a background, put it into context. Perhaps when this ink is dry, you work into it with pencil, with other details. You start drawing sort of, perhaps there are outlines of trees. And if you're in a sort of built-up area where you reflected buildings, or you're doing the technique indoors and you have some jam jars and things like that, be imaginative with your stamping. What could you use for brickwork? Perhaps an old cork has some nice texture, and you could use that to create a brickwork within a square form. Perhaps some silver foil scrunched up again makes a nice sort of building texture. So you have to kind of just have a look around the house, rummage the recycling and see what you can find. And things like bubble wrap, really, really, really nice things to print with. There we go. I hope everyone's enjoying this, and again, thank you so much for all your support with the journal. Have fun out there in the rain.